Hello, welcome back to Catholic Reboot. This episode is around the conversion to the Catholic Church. And although some of it can be kind of dry in a step format, what I want to do is kind of change it up a little bit in the beginning by giving some overture on those Catholics that came over to the Catholic Church. So, in the actual footnotes to this video, or what they call show notes, I'm going to actually give you a link that lists all those people, mostly famous people, that converted to the Catholic Church. But one of my most favorite conversions was G.K. Chesterton, because for any of you that don't know who he is, he was a prolific writer at the turn of the century. And if you ever try reading his works, and I'll put up on the screen his most major works, you find he's tough to read, which means he's got a brilliant mind. So whenever I would read um, his works, especially around like St. Francis of Assisi or St. Thomas Aquinas, I'd have to read it again and again, right? And also his writings on Jesus Christ. He's got this way of phrasing that's remarkable. What's interesting about G.K. Chesterton is he came to the faith very late in life. He was an Anglican, but at a young age, he was actually more of an atheist. I mean, he had a group of buddies. They're very scholarly, and they would use more of a Socratic method in order to learn anything. So even with their faith, they started somewhat as an atheistic or um, no religion at all, right? And then they worked through the process. Then ultimately, he embraced the faith of his father, right, or his family rather, which was Anglican, and his wife was an Anglican, so they were good Anglicans. When he eventually converted to Catholicism through a unknown priest by the name of Father Brown, and by the way, if you ever heard about the Father Brown mysteries, that's where they came from. G.K. Chesterton actually used to write for two different papers, in one of them, and even journals. He wrote the stories of Father Brown. Now, they weren't the real stories of this real priest, but he was so impressed by the priest, he gave the main character the name Father Brown. Father Brown did a very good job with his conversion, but G.K. Chesterton came so late to the faith that he had so much to draw on for his conversion. His wife actually broke down and cried when she heard he converted, mostly because she knew that to keep the marriage going, she's probably going to have to convert as well, and ultimately she did. His friend Hilary Belloc was born and raised as a Catholic, and he too was a great writer. Excuse me. But the G.K. Chesterton does credit a lot of his understanding with Belloc, and Belloc was very unapologetic about why G.K. Chesterton should leave the Anglican Church and become a Catholic. So, if you ever get time, uh, try to look into both these authors. They wrote great works and very deep. And you may ultimately become part of a G.K. Chesterton group, because there are groups out there that all get together and discuss his writings. Before I get into the main theme of how conversion to the Catholic Church starts, what I want to do is show you a clip that was done by a traditional Catholic organization around G.K. G.K. Chesterton and conversion to the Catholic Church, and then I'll pick up with all the steps uh, in the process.
A New Religion by G.K. Chesterton. The Catholic faith used to be called the old religion, but at the present moment it has a recognized place among the new religions. This has nothing to do with its truth or falsehood, but it is a fact that has a great deal to do with the understanding of the modern world. It would be very undesirable that modern man should accept Catholicism merely as a novelty. Even those who denounce it generally denounce it as a novelty, as an innovation, and not merely a survival. They talk of the advanced party in the Church of England. They talk of the aggression of the Church of Rome. When they talk of an extremist, they are as likely to mean a ritualist as a socialist. Given any normal, respectable Protestant family, Anglican or Puritan, in England or America, we shall find that Catholicism is actually, for practical purposes, treated as a new religion. That is, a revolution. It is not a survival. It is not, in that sense, an antiquity. It does not necessarily owe anything to tradition. In places where tradition can do nothing for it, in places where all the tradition is against it, it is intruding on its own merits, not as a tradition, but a truth. The father of some such Anglican or American Puritan family will find, very often, that all his children are breaking away from his own more or less Christian compromise, regarded as normal in the 19th century, and going off in various directions after various faiths or fashions which he would call fads. One of his sons will become a socialist and hang up a portrait of Lenin. One of his daughters will become a spiritualist and play with a planchette. Another daughter will go over to Christian Science, and it is quite likely that another son will go over to Rome. The point is, for the moment, that from the point of view of the father, and even in a sense of the family, all these things act the manner of new religions, of great movements, of enthusiasms that carry people off their feet and leave older people bewildered or annoyed. Catholicism, indeed, even more than the others, is often spoken of as if it were actually one of the wild passions of youth. Optimistic aunts and uncles say that the youth will get over it, as if it were a childish love affair, or that unfortunate business with the barmaid. Darker and sterner aunts and uncles, perhaps at a rather earlier period, used to actually talk about it as an indecent indulgence, as if its literature were literally a sort of pornography. Newman remarks quite naturally, as if there were nothing odd about it at the time, that an undergraduate found with an ascetic manual or a book of monastic meditations was under a sort of cloud or taint, as having been caught with a bad book in his possession. He had been wallowing in the sensual pleasure of nones, or inflaming his lusts by contemplating an incorrect number of candles. It is perhaps no longer the custom to regard conversion as a form of dissipation, but it is still common to regard conversion as a form of revolt. And as regards the established convention of much of the modern world, it is a revolt. The worthy merchant of the middle class, the worthy farmer of the Middle West, when he sends his son to college, does now feel a faint alarm lest the boy should fall among thieves, in the sense of communists, but he has the same sort of fear lest he should fall among Catholics. Now he has no fear lest he should fall among Calvinists. He has no fear that his children will become 7th century Surplicarians, however much he may dislike that doctrine. He is not even particularly troubled by the possibility of their adopting the extreme Soldefinian conceptions once common among some of the more extravagant Methodists. He is not likely to wait with terror at the telegram that will inform him that his son has become a Fifth Monarchy man any more than he has joined the Albigensians. He does not exactly lie awake at night wondering whether Tom at Oxford has become a Lutheran any more than a Lollard. All these religions he dimly recognizes as dead religions, or at any rate as old religions, and he is only frightened of new religions. He is only frightened of those fresh, provocative, paradoxical new notions that fly to the young people's heads. But amongst these dangerous juvenile attractions he does in practice class the freshness and novelty of Rome. Now, this is rather odd, because Rome is not so very new. Among these annoying new religions, one is rather an old religion, but it is the only old religion that is so new. When it was originally and really new, no doubt a Roman father often found himself in the same position as the Anglican or Puritan father. He too might find all his children going strange ways and deserting the household gods in the sacred temple of the capital. He too might find that one of those children had joined the Christians in their ecclesia, and possibly in their catacombs. But he would have found that, of his other children, one cared for nothing but the mysteries of Orpheus. Another was inclined to follow Mithras. Another was a Neo-Pythagorean, who had learned vegetarianism from the Hindus, and so on. Though the Roman father, unlike the Victorian father, might have had the pleasure of exercising the patria potestas and cutting off the heads of all the heretics, he could not cut off the stream of all the heresies. Only by this time most of the streams have run rather dry. It is now seldom necessary for the anxious parent to warn his children against the undesirable society of the bull of Mithras, or even to wean him from the exclusive contemplation of Orpheus. And though we have vegetarians always with us, they mostly know more about Proteads than about Pythagoras. But that other youthful extravagance is still youthful. That other new religion is once again new. That one fleeting fashion has refused to fleet, and that ancient bit of modernity is still modern. It is still to the Protestant parent now exactly what it was to the pagan parent then. We might say simply that it is a nuisance, but anyhow it is a novelty, and it is not simply what the father is used to, or even what the son is used to. It is common in as something fresh and disturbing. Whether as it came to the Greeks who were always seeking some new thing, or as it came to the shepherds who first heard the cry upon the hills of the good news that our language calls the gospel. We can explain the fact of the Greeks in the time of St. Paul regarding it as a new thing, because it was a new thing. But who will explain why it is still as new to the last of the converts as it was to the first of the shepherds? It is as if a man 100 years old entered the Olympian Games among the young Greek athletes, which would surely have been the basis of a Greek legend. There is something almost as legendary about the religion that is 2,000 years old now, appearing as a rival of the new religions. That is what has to be explained and cannot be explained away. Nothing can turn the legend into a myth. We have seen with our own eyes and heard with our own ears this great modern quarrel between young Catholics and old Protestants, and it is the first step to recognize in any study of modern conversion. I am not going to talk about numbers and statistics, though I may say something about them later. The first fact to realize is a difference of a substance which falsifies all the difference of size. The great majority of Protestant bodies today, whether they are strong or weak, are not strengthened in this particular fashion, by the actual attraction of their new followers to their old doctrines. A young man will suddenly become a Catholic priest, or even a Catholic monk, because he has a spontaneous and even impatient personal enthusiasm for the doctrine of virginity as it appeared to St. Catherine or St. Clare. But how many men become Baptist ministers because they have a personal horror of the idea of an innocent infant coming unconsciously to Christ? How many honest Presbyterian ministers in Scotland really want to go back to John Knox, as a Catholic mystic might want to go back to John of the Cross? These men inherit positions which they feel they can hold with reasonable consistency and general agreement, but they do inherit them. For them religion is tradition. We Catholics naturally do not sneer at tradition, but we say that in this case it is really tradition and nothing else. No, not one man in 100 of these people would ever have joined his present communion if he had been born outside it. Not one man in 1,000 of them would have invented anything like his church formulas if they had not been laid down for him. None of them has any real reason for being in their own particular church, whatever good reason they may still have for being outside ours. In other words, the old creed of their communion has ceased to function as a fresh and stimulating idea. It is at best a motto, or war cry, and at the worst, a catchword, but it is not meeting contemporary ideas like contemporary idea. In their time and in their turn, we believe that those other contemporary ideas will also prove their mortality by having also become mottos and catchwords and traditions. A century or two hence, spiritualism may be a tradition, and socialism may be a tradition, and Christian Science may be a tradition. But Catholicism will not be a tradition. It will still be a nuisance and a new and dangerous thing. These are the general considerations which govern any personal study of conversion to the Catholic faith. The Church has defended tradition in a time which stupidly denied and despised tradition. But that is simply because the Church is always the only thing defending whatever is at the moment stupidly despised. It is already beginning to appear as the only champion of reason in the 20th century, as it was the only champion of tradition in the 19th. We know that the higher mathematics is trying to deny that 2 and 2 make 4, and the higher mysticism to imagine something that is beyond good and evil. Amid all these anti-rational philosophies, ours will remain the only rational philosophy. In the same spirit, the Church did indeed point out the value of tradition to a time which treated it as quite valueless. The 19th century neglect of tradition and mania for mere documents were altogether nonsensical. They amounted to saying that men always tell lies to children, but men never make mistakes in books. But though our sympathies are traditional because they are human, it is not that part of the thing which stamp it as divine. The mark of the faith is not tradition. It is conversion. It is the miracle by which men find truth in spite of tradition and often with the rending of all the roots of humanity. It is with the nature of this process that I propose to deal, and it is difficult to deal with it without introducing something of a personal element. My own is only a very trivial case, but naturally it is the case I know best, and I shall be compelled in the pages that follow to make many illustrations from it. I have therefore thought it well to put first this general note on the nature of the movement in my time, to show that I am well aware that it is very much larger and even a very much later movement than is implied in describing my own life or generation. I believe it will be more an issue for the rising generation and for the generation after that, as they discover the actual alternative in the awful actualities of our time. And Catholics, when they stand up together and sing the faith of our fathers, may realize almost with amusement that they might well be singing faith of our children. And in many cases the return has been so recent as almost to deserve the description of a children's crusade. Chapter 2. The Obvious Blunders. I have noted that Catholicism really is in the 20th century what it was in the 2nd century. It is the new religion. Indeed, its very antiquity preserves an attitude of novelty. I have always thought it striking and even stirring that in the venerable invocation of the Tantum Ergo, which for us seems to come loaded with accumulated ages, there is still the language of innovation, of the antique document that must yield to a new rite. For us the hymn is something of an antique document itself, but the rite is always new. But if a convert is to write of conversion, he must try to retrace his steps out of that shrine back into that ultimate wilderness where he was once really believed that this eternal youth was only the old religion. It is a thing exceedingly difficult to do and not often done well, and I for one have little hope of doing it even tolerably well. The difficulty was expressed to me by another convert who said, "I cannot explain why I am a Catholic, because now that I am a Catholic I cannot imagine myself as anything else." Nevertheless, it is right to make the imaginative effort. It is not bigotry to be certain we are right, but it is a bigotry to be unable to imagine how we might possibly have gone wrong. It is my duty to try to understand what H. G. Wells can possibly mean when he says that the medieval church did not care for education, but only for imposing dogmas. It is my duty to speculate, however darkly, on what can have been made an intelligent man like Arnold Benedict stone blind to all the plainest facts about Spain. It is my duty to find, if I can, the thread of connected thought in George Moore's various condemnation of Catholic Ireland. And it is equally my duty to labor till I understand the strange mental state of G. K. Chesterton when he really assumed that the Catholic Church was a sort of ruined abbey, almost as deserted as Stonehenge. I must say first that in my own case it was at worst a matter of slights rather than slanders. Many converts far more important than I have had to wrestle with 100 devils of howling falsehood, with a swarm of lies and libels. I owe it to the liberal and universalist atmosphere of my family, of Stopford Brooke, and the Unitarian preachers they followed, that I was always just sufficiently enlightened to be out of the reach of Maria Monk. Nevertheless, as this is but a private privilege for which I have to be thankful, it is necessary to say something of what I might be tempted to call the obvious slanders. But that better men than I have not always seen that the slander was obvious, I do not think that they exercise much influence on the generation that is younger than mine. The worst temptation of the most pagan youth is not so much to denounce monks for breaking their vow, as to wonder at them for keeping it. But there is a state of transition that must be allowed for in which a vague Protestant prejudice would rather like to have it both ways. There is
I wanted to stop it right there because it goes on quite a bit. But I wanted you first to get a taste of how G.K. Chesterton wrote, right? Very complete, but he goes and he goes quick, right? So I find myself having to replay what he says because he's pretty rich in his writing and dialogue. The important part about, and the reason why I use this as part of the conversions series, is that G.K. Chesterton came very late. He was 48 years old. And when he came with more of an educated approach, right? And he admits that it was very difficult for him to do it because of all he had experienced through his childhood, teenage years, and then as an Anglican. But he credits, as I said before, Father Brown taking his time because G.K. Chesterton is a very methodical man, and he was trying to make sure that this wasn't just emotional, right? So I will have the entire a recording of what you just heard in the show notes if you want to go and actually listen to it in its entirety. I caution you that you may either want to fall asleep when listening to him, you surely would if you read his works, but if you can start training your mind to read Chesterton, it does expand your desire in literature. You start reading more profound readers, right? Today it's kind of difficult because everything is so visual. In his day, he used to get great crowds anywhere he talked, right? He actually came to the United States a couple times, and it was like having, I don't know, Babe Ruth show up to a baseball game. He was that well known. Um, so I'm going to cut this episode off right now. The next episode, part two, is actually going to go into the steps. I just decided to let this reading of Chesterton go a little bit longer than originally planned. So I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you very much.